Good afternoon. I'm here with Allie Mellen, principal analyst at Forrester. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you.
She has a very long biography. She is a Forrester analyst covering security operations, nation-state threats, and the use of automation, machine learning, and AI in security tools. She's a computer engineer and has held various engineering roles, including some research at MIT, running her own engineering consultancy, and being a hacker, before finally becoming a security practitioner. So Ali, let's just start there. You always just say that thing, I was a hacker. Yeah. So what does that actually mean? Did you actually steal anything, or was it just, did you break in, or what were you doing down there in the hacking department?
So I actually got my start in hacking at college.
Okay.
And at university we had one class that was dedicated to cybersecurity, and it was great because it was very offensive, hands-on. We had to hack a server for our midterm.
Okay.
And so for our mid-year project, we had to either do our own research hacking into something or recreate someone else's. And so we set out to turn the Square reader into a credit card skimmer.
Okay.
And we succeeded in that. And so we were presenting it to our professor, and he was like, "You should submit this to Black Hat." And I was like, "What's Black Hat?"
Okay.
And so we submitted it, it got accepted, and so my first real experience with the security industry was flying out to Vegas and getting on CNN and CNBC and all of that, which was a really great experience. And so after that, I fell in love with the industry. I met so many great people, and I continued doing more white hat hacking over the years before transitioning into a security practitioner role, reporting into the CISO, so kind of switching it a little bit. But I never used my powers for evil, so to speak. It was mostly focused on good.
Good. I just wanted to clear that up at the outset. So, I mean, Ali, this, I've just recently learned that after 20 plus years, the UN is finally gearing up to hold a plenary this July. It's called the Global Mechanism, and it's basically member states who are going to be sitting down and trying to thrash out some kind of way of dealing with cyber security. Now, first of all, I mean, Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia are going to be in the room, okay? And those are always the four nations that are mentioned as the actors in big state-sponsored attacks. So, I mean, how does one think about that? I mean, well, maybe just speak to me a little bit about how one would go about regulating something as amorphous and variable as cybersecurity and cyberspace.
Yeah, it's really difficult. So I just released a book in March called Code War: How Nations Hack, Spy, and Shape the Digital Battlefield. And in that I go over China, Russia, and the US, and I talk about how they use cyber attacks for geopolitical leverage. And that was 2 years of research looking into exactly this type of thing, which is not only how do they use cyber attacks, but how does that affect the geopolitical landscape? What are the decisions being made by other groups to try and regulate and manage that? And then also from a defensive perspective, what are they doing from a digital sovereignty standpoint to try to establish some control in their nations? And so it's really fascinating that the UN is doing this. And it was interesting because in some of the interviews that I did for this book, that was one question that kept coming up. Is why don't we have any regulation or any standards to define this?
Yeah.
And there was one interview that I did where it was a very interesting conversation because he brought up that they have actually tried to do this before. They have actually tried to set these standards at the UN and at other organizations. But it's always been incredibly difficult because at the end of the day, Russia or China or Iran will veto it.
Yeah.
And they'll block it from taking place. And most of the reason that we see that being the case is because things are much better for all of these nation states if there is a gray area that they can operate in.
Yeah.
The second that you start to define the red lines is when there start to be issues with how close you can get to that red line, or also what escalation will look like after it. One of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is that cyber attacks can be used in a way to escalate or to de-escalate, depending on what you're trying to do and depending on the action that you're perpetrating. And so even the premise of a red line that you can cross from a cybersecurity standpoint is establishing an escalation path that is going to take you to the next level, because it's saying this is where things change. This is the moment that things change. So
give me an example.
Yeah, so a good example of this would be, there's some understated red lines that the countries themselves align to a little bit, right? Like if we look at major cyber attacks against electric grids or hospitals or any type of like power source, that type of thing, there's a lot that China will do, that Russia will do to target them, to kind of show that they're in these networks, but they're not necessarily taking them out across the entire country.
So it's a signal.
It's a signal, yes. It's a signal that they can escalate if they want to.
Yeah.
And if you back down, then they're not going to escalate.
Yeah.
And so if they were to take out the electric grid across the United States as an example, that would be an immediate escalation, and they know that. And we don't need the defined red line for them to know and be aware that that's where it is, at least to a certain extent. But there is some value in shedding light on like what should those norms be, where should we establish that line so that we can protect people more effectively. I just have a lot of doubt, but also curiosity as to if we'll get there in this session, because it is something that there's not a lot of appetite for, certainly when we look at countries like Russia, China, or Iran. But to be honest, also now when we look at countries like the United States, who are taking a much more active and offensively aggressive approach to the cyber attacks they use.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, they've got some UN red line on like blinding soldiers in war. That's like, so that would kind of be this kind of, it would be along those lines. And I mean, but I mean, I don't understand still like the fact that, you know, it seems like they're still stuck on the definitions of in fact what these things are, and it's probably it's going to be a process of defining what the process is, and where does that leave like the rest of the world? I mean, it's, you know, other than the EU, possibly Britain, possibly Canada, well, in fact, definitely Canada, the US, but there seems to be a great, like, so for instance, the African continent, you know, I mean, the stats are, I mean, South Africa is the most breached country on the continent. So it's like, we're kind of sitting ducks. I mean, there's no way we can kind of protect ourselves against these things.
It's extremely difficult,
yeah.
And a lot of the attacks that at least we see based on our research coming for the African continent and South Africa especially are like cyber criminal motivated,
yeah.
And more focused around that than necessarily nation state, but the nation state activity is still happening on a continuous basis because there's so much information they can gather, so much that is valuable in a wartime scenario. So I do think that events like the one that we're at are so important for this reason, because we need more coordination, not just in the individual countries we're operating in, but across the world with our allies to determine what are the threat intelligence signals that we should be keeping in mind and at what time. That coordination is extremely difficult and requires coordination at the government level, which is one thing that for many of the attendees here who are very focused in industry and telecommunications and finance, it's not something that's in their control, which makes this even a bigger issue. And so it really is a moment where the governments themselves need to start engaging in a much more active way, especially on collaboration.
But I mean, it's not like we are going to invite the government of Botswana into South Africa to come to our cyber command here, and I doubt they're going to invite us, you know, because it's every person for themselves, you know. That's seemingly the way it is with country-based attacks and organizations as well. You know, no one wants to talk about a cyber breach, you know, and you never almost hear about. I mean, I don't. I'm not a. I was possibly a conspiracy theorist in my younger years, but I mean, I'm not. I'm slightly more clear-eyed now, I think, and you know. I don't know if we hear about these attacks. I mean, I heard about the OT attack fairly recently on the gauge readers in gas stations across. I don't know how severe the incursion was, but that was pinned on Iran. You know, and that seems to be one of those things of like we can be in there if we want. You know.
Yes.
Yeah.
We absolutely can.
So I mean, when you say, I mean, it's just great to. Great collaboration. I mean, do you see that happening anytime soon? I mean, it's just seemingly out of reach at the moment.
Yeah, the key to this is definitely trust. And what we see is that certainly private organizations are not inclined to trust the governments that they are having to work with, certainly like from a regulatory standpoint. It's just the reality, and they shouldn't necessarily trust them, right? We've seen abuses of power that have happened across the world with the governments that are using that type of information for surveillance and other things. So I'm not saying that the enterprises should be trusting the government here, but I do think that there is a level of collaboration that happens, particularly between allies. If you look at like the Five Eyes or the expansion of the Five Eyes that's taken place, where some of this information can be shared in a way that isn't putting either nation at risk, but is enabling a little bit more coordination. And then from there, those nations can choose what information to disseminate to the enterprises within the region or to like some of the smaller businesses, or what advice to give. And so that type of framework is our best way to help protect against some of these more complex attacks, and also to help protect against some of the attacks that might be from like hacktivist groups, for example, in times of war or some wartime scenarios, which do not seem to be going away anytime soon and have started to pick up.
Yeah. Do you pay the ransom?
The age-old question.
Well, I mean, there was this worldwide learning management system that is with hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of students' personal information, and they paid this last 2 weeks. So they obviously just, I mean, it's, do you weigh it up, or how do you see that? How do you think about that?
As with everything in cybersecurity, it's not black and white, unfortunately. And so I do think that there are some instances where it makes sense to pay. Unfortunately, like the reason that it makes sense to pay is because you didn't do the upfront work to make sure that you were protected or could recover. Like if we're thinking about effective ransomware response, it starts with recovery. Recovery is the most important piece of this puzzle, and that's where everyone should start. But there are certain circumstances where, say, you've done everything from a recovery standpoint to make sure that you at least have something to recover from, but maybe that backup has gotten attacked by the attackers as well. There comes to be a certain point where there's no other option. And so if there's no other option, the reality is that you have to pay the ransom if you want your organization to survive. But we need to be ensuring that we are having secure backups, that we are, of course, defending against ransomware more holistically across the identify, protect, detect, respond stages, so that those types of things don't happen. So it's unfortunately a nuanced gray area. It is not a strategy to just pay the ransom and be like, oh, now I'll go about my day and I don't need ransomware protection at all, because you will be hit again and very soon, and it's going to cost you a lot. And reputationally as well, not just from the cost of the ransom. But there are certain circumstances where it's just an unfortunate reality.
In your speech today, you were saying that Forrester had identified 3 significant challenges. The lack of a comprehensive vulnerability and exposure remediation prioritization strategy. A mouthful. A complexity of the the complexity of the IT environment, and a lack of visibility and influence within the organization, including the difficulty in making business cases. I mean, what have you seen? I mean, you know, over the years, have those changed? Are those still? I mean, that's top of mind for 2026, but I mean, have you seen any of those change over the years? And what can the CISO actually do about those? Like, go because these are CISOs telling you this is what they are experiencing.
Yes.
So why aren't they doing anything about it? Is it it's just like, oh, they're just part of the business? Is it just?
Yeah, so our data is of thousands of security decision makers, and so it's been very interesting to see, like I've been at Forrester for 5 years, I've seen the data evolve and change. When it comes to that list, the complexity of the IT environment is constantly in the top 3. That's always in the top 3. One other that is often in the top 3 is...
a tool, like sprawl of tools and...
Yes.
Okay.
Because ultimately you have tools in your environment that, and like just from an IT perspective, that are completely different. So for an example, you might have Windows XP running somewhere, and then you have operating systems that are running on the latest version of Windows. Having both of those at once is a big difficulty if you want to protect them equally. Similarly, you might have a bunch of servers and you have a bunch of laptops, and making decisions around what you want to protect and how you want to protect it, what EDR you want to use where, that can be a complex decision. And now the complexity of the IT environment is just getting much worse with AI and with the number of AI agents that are being created, because you have to secure those agents. But the reality is, even last year, we were seeing there are organizations that have thousands of agents already built. One organization we were talking to...
And the business is doing it by themselves.
Totally.
Yeah, by themselves, because it's a business. They just want to do getting something done. And
yes.
Yeah.
And the individuals are doing it by themselves because they're being told experiment with this, which is great, but it can be very difficult to enable. We've talked to organizations that have 36,000 agents, and that was as of last year. That's a massive number that you have to not only identify, but then protect and make sure that the organization is protected from any malicious action that could be taken even by that agent, but also by someone else on that agent. So there's a lot of complexity to the environment that is just getting worse and is only going to get worse with AI.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. The vulnerability management one is a really interesting piece because it is consistently in the top 5, but this is the first year I've seen where it has made number 1 on this list. And it makes a lot of sense given with what we're seeing with AI and a lot of the concerns that we've heard about AI over the past few years and around it being able to identify vulnerabilities. Of course, we've seen that come to a head with Mythos and Daybreak, and how these AI models are being used to identify vulnerabilities more effectively than previous models. And so it makes sense that it would rise on the prioritization of the CISO, but the challenge with both of these is that they're largely out of control of the CISO directly, right? Vulnerability prioritization you can do, but actually getting the patch done is not a decision that the CISO is just going to make, or we would have done it already. It is a business problem and a business case problem. And the same thing with the complexity of the IT environment. The CISO can advise, they can make recommendations, but at the end of the day, the business is going to do what it wants to do or what it feels it needs to do to get ahead. And so both of these are very critical pieces. And one of the things that I was recommending in my talk today was use the Mythos moment, even if it is all marketing, and it comes out that this is not something that is as big a deal as they talk about. It has the attention of the entire world. So use it as your way to get patching done that you otherwise wouldn't be able to, and to start to rethink your patching processes to make sure that patching gets done faster. Because there is a near future where these models are out in the world and they are able to find vulnerabilities faster than we've had before, and we need to be prepared for that. And this time right now is our time to prepare.
When do you expect them to release it?
So they just made an announcement that they're starting to release it more broadly to more countries and more companies. I think that the number was 150 more companies and 15 more countries or something like that. So we're starting to see the rollout happen slowly. I would imagine by the end of the year, they would have rolled this out to many more organizations, but to be honest, I have no idea. It is entirely up to Anthropic and what they decide, or what OpenAI decides to do that pushes Anthropic to do a similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I mean, I know you said that you weren't as worried about 0 days as with the cadence of incursions. Yeah, that's what you think. That's what you think is going to be coming down the pike.
Yes. This is very important because When I was a hacker, like, I understood that there were certain things that limited how effective I could be, right? There's needing to understand the environment that you're operating in, needing to do the reconnaissance to understand that environment, needing to build exploits that are for certain vulnerabilities in that environment, and then needing to actually execute on that. A lot of those constraints disappear with AI, because if you can have an AI system that you tell it, land in the system, identify the operating system, build an exploit on the fly for this based on the vulnerabilities you know exist on this operating system, and then execute, you can do privilege escalation very quickly and get into an organization and get advanced privileges very quickly in that organization. And that is a much more dynamic way to approach malware than we've been able to do before. It's been comparatively very static if you're building for a specific vulnerability in a specific operating system in a specific environment. And so that dynamic nature is the thing that I am more concerned about at this point, because that's what AI is especially good at, is going and executing a task that you've told it to do based on the environmental variables that you give it. And that's all that this type of malware would need to do in order to be much more dynamic in the environment, in order to make decisions that are based on what environment it's working in. And so that's a big concern for me moving forward, is not just the velocity of the attacks, or if we're going to see a bunch of 0 days, but the fact that we have vulnerabilities that have existed for
decades.
10 years, 20 years, and those can still be exploited today. That's the low-hanging fruit that they're going to take advantage of.
What do we do?
We need to be patching, and we need to develop faster patching cycles for the technology that we're using, which includes ultimately like upgrading your systems.
And automatically patching, actually.
Ideally, it is very difficult, but you need to have an understanding of what you're going to prioritize from a vulnerability standpoint, and what you can actually do more automated patching on that isn't going to disrupt business processes, which is where things get really complicated. But if you can find that sweet spot, then you're going to be able to address certain things and then prioritize other things that require a bit more manual work. But that process needs to change. It has to change at this point.
Allie Mellen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.